Okay, we have four stories we're going to be reading. And the first story I'm trying to get this thing. We're going to be reading is called Peter Rabbit and His Mom and His Ma. Replica of the antique original 1917 edition. Peter Rabbit and His Ma. Peter Rabbit and His Mom. 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 It all came about because Mrs. Rufus Rabbit had suddenly become very strict about the comings and goings of Peter Rabbit and Molly Cottontail and Flopsy and Mopsy. Mrs. Rufus Rabbit was Peter Rabbit's ma. They must get up and go to bed at just such an hour and ask permission every time they went out of the house. Peter Rabbit was rather fond of having his own way, and he promptly made up his mind that while such rules were all very well for Molly Cottontail, who never had a mind of her own, anyway, for Flopsy, Mopsy, and Mopsy, who were far too young and to do anything but to mind somebody else. As far as he was concerned, he intended to go to bed when he liked and get up when he pleased. The more he thought of it, the crosser he became. He'd gone to bed very much earlier than usual and not a bit sleepy. Visions of many, many nights when he could have to go to bed when he was not sleepy danced before his eyes. Finally, he decided to run away. At first, he thought of taking Molly Cottontail along with him. Then he concluded that the twins would be very lonely without her. Peter Rabbit was not a selfish bunny. At any rate, he thought he would get on much faster alone. He began to make his plans and grew so excited he found it impossible to go to sleep at all. He could hardly wait till the first little slimming streak of sunlight peeked out the door of the burrow. It seemed to beckon on him, to offer all sorts of promises, and to urge him to seek for the fun about which he had been thinking all night. Very quickly and quietly he crept out and dressed, pausing every now and then to glance fiercely toward the spot where the other members of the family lay curled up in little furry balls, peacefully, and Mrs. Rufus Rabbit abundantly sleeping. Soon he was quite ready, and after one dreadful moment when he felt quite sure the whole family was wide awake and ready to grab him as he crept past on tiptoe, he found himself outside the burrow, running for his life through the soft spring sunshine. He ran without noticing in what direction for some time, beginning to feel tired and lengthened his speed, and finally stopped quite still and looked about him. A second glance showed him a great field of turnips only a few yards ahead of him. He was beginning to feel very hungry, so in another moment he was blissfully at work rooting up a fine juicy turnip. On this he feasted until he could eat no more. Unwilling to leave such a tempting meal, he finally dug up a second fine plump turnip and carried it away, slung over his shoulder. He thought it might taste good for luncheon. Robin Redbreast flew across his path and wished him a cheery good morning. Peter gaily stopped for a few moments of chatter. Already he felt a little lonely and looked after the robin rather wistfully as it flew over the bushes. We have 58 pages. A little farther on, the wee shrew mouse popped her head out of the hole ahead of him and squeaked a little but good-natured greeting. Peter sat down on his haunches. In a very pleasant half an hour, the shrew mouse told him her name was Susan and advised him to throw down the big turnip as it was a very heavy burden. Besides, he would be sure to find plenty of nice things to eat if he followed her instructions. Then she wished him a good luck and vanished into her hole in the ground. Accordingly, he dropped the load of luncheon that had already given him a backache. And trotted along very much comfortably and quickly. Right around a turn in the road ran a clear stream of blue water with a little wooden bridge across it, and on the very edge of the water sat an old bullfrog who croaked out, "Look out, for you will fall into the water." Now the warning sounded so funny that Peter, who had just started to cross the bridge, commenced to laugh, and laughed so hard that he lost his balance and tumbled straight into the water. The bullfrog seemed to think this a very great joke, and in his turn began to laugh loudly. It did not seem so comical to Peter, but luckily the water was so shallow that he quickly stumbled to dry ground with no inconvenience than a thorough wetting. As the bullfrog was not at all inclined to be friendly, he did not stop to dry himself, but trotted on for quite a while before he stopped in a sunny spot and took off the nice red coat his ma had made for him, hung it on the sumac bush to dry. He was beginning to feel hungry and wondered where all the good things that Susan Shrew Mouse had promised him. While wondering where he would find his luncheon and wishing he had not so easily disposed of this nice turnip, he heard a funny little squeaking voice behind him. It seemed to be speaking as well as squeaking to him. "How do you do, Peter Rabbit?" it said, and turning around, Peter saw a plump little field mouse sitting by the side of the path. "My cousin Susan Shrew Mouse sent me word by the carrier pigeon that you were coming this way. Pray come and have lunch on with me," he said. Peter Rabbit was carefully delighted, for his little round tummy had started to give him some inside information. It was the kind that made him uncomfortable. He had never been hungry before. He thought with regret of the good food his mother had always provided, and he began to see himself in the light of a very ungrateful bunny indeed. Suppose he never found his way home and never saw his Ma and Molly Cottontail and the twins again. 2 large tears rolled down his long nose at the delightful thought. But the voice of Freddie Field Mouse broke up on his gloomy reverie. Luncheon was laid out on a large flat stone under a shady green bush, and the 2 furry friends feasted on crispy green lettuce, fresh pink radishes, tempting yellow carrots, yellow carrots. So long did they sit over the meal that Peter discovered, much to his dismay, that the sun was beginning to sink in the west. With many things, thanks to his kind little host, he put on the little red coat that was now quite dry, and with a last goodbye started down the path as a good piece, feeling much rested and refreshed, but not knowing at all where he was going, for the field mouse had been unable to give him much information, as he had lately come to that part of the country when Peter Rabbit did not reach home by dusk. Mrs. Rufus Rabbit began to get very anxious, having to feed Molly Cottontail and the twins and put them to bed. She quickly dressed in her coat and bonnet, took her lantern and walking stick that belonged to Peter Rabbit's paw, for who knows but there may be bears in the woods, and she said to herself, and not very far did she have to go for what, knowing it, Peter had been traveling in a circle, and in the foot of the big oak tree in the nest of a green fern she found him fast asleep. And Peter went nicely to sleep, very glad to be home again, and very, very much ashamed of himself for having run away from it. And the last thing he remembered after he had rolled over to get a look at Molly Cottontail and the twins was feeling his mom's soft muzzle rubbing against his face, for that is the way bunnies kiss one another good night. The end.